If people in your town suddenly started dying horrible deaths, what would you do? Everyone you love is getting murdered by a mysterious plague, and the truth behind what is causing it is more terrifying than anyone can imagine. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the mysterious plague in Shiki. This doctor here has no idea that everyone he loves is about to die. Toshio here is the town of Sotoba's best doctor, and who has just been tasked with inspecting a recent crime scene on the outskirts of town. This woman, who died of natural causes, along with her husband and their neighbor next door, who are both mutilated as hell. However, something is off, because Toshio can tell that the wife of this couple died several days after the husband and their neighbor, which, if that's true, means that this lady was living with a mutilated corpse for a whole week before she died herself, without telling anyone about it. The police think it's just wild dogs, but Toshio knows that this horror show wasn't caused by wild dogs, and he's right, because later he gets a call from a house nearby. Someone from the village has just gotten sick. Okay, this peaceful little village has already faced what I would describe to be a horrifying situation, and the fact that this happened in a small village makes this even worse, because being in a small town means that anyone nearby could be next. Now, the wild dog theory is highly unlikely, but even if it were true, all it would take for them to confirm this theory would be to see if any of the entrance doors were open, and if there were any paw prints or marks left within the house, or any dog hairs or urine from dogs. I doubt any wild dog would be able to open a door properly without leaving some scratch marks, nor be able to have wiped their paws perfectly before entering the house. I mean, I guess anything is possible, but I highly doubt this theory is worth following up on. And another reason why death by wild dogs is super unlikely is because, unlike Dom's hometown of Thailand, Japan having stray dogs just in general is a highly rare occurrence, due to Article 6, Clause 9 of the rabies prevention law in Japan, which states that stray dogs must be impounded and disposed of within a set amount of time if no owner comes forward, making Japan's kill rate of their nation's cats and dogs to be over 200,000 a year. But that's a story for another day. Something this huge happening in such a small village would put me on edge. And the police taking this lightly? This is going to cost them. Toshio then rushes over to the sick girl's house, where we see her laying there, sleepy and in a daze, and who the doc thinks has a mild case of anemia, and so he takes a blood sample and tells her to get some rest. However, later, pink hair girl begins to have insane visions of a creepy blonde woman and passes out. And things are about to get a whole lot more sinister, because the next morning Toshio gets a call and finds out that the very same pink girl he took a blood sample from has mysteriously died, and no one knows how. Toshio then asks the family if he can do an autopsy, but they demand that he get the hell out instead, forcing the town's best qualified doctor to leave even more clueless than he was before. The next day, the village holds a wake for pink hair girl, and the whole town shows up, including this big city kid turned small village student, Natsuno. And this dude is so cold and calloused, it's disgusting, and I love it, because this wake only makes him want to get the hell out of this town even more. However, little does he realize that he'll soon join this girl instead. Later that day, at the only hospital in Sotoba, Toshio finally receives the results of pink hair girl's blood test, and what he is about to discover could not be more insane. Toshio discovers that pink hair girl didn't have what he thought, which was myocytic hypochromic anemia, aka iron deficiency anemia, the most common type of anemia out there, but instead finds out that she had normocytic normochromic anemia, which is usually caused by bleeding. However, Toshio says that when he examined pink hair girl, he didn't find any visible wounds or internal bleeding, meaning he doesn't know how her body shut down so quickly, and since they couldn't do an autopsy on her, he had no clue what went wrong. The hospital suddenly then gets a call from another family that someone else in the village has died, this time being an old man who appears to have died from a summer cold and anemia, just like pink hair girl. Okay, what did I say before? If I was in the big city, I wouldn't think twice about a death or two, whatever, it happens. But the fact that multiple people died within the last week within this tiny town makes me nervous as hell. Now, a summer cold is simply a cold that people usually catch during, but not limited to, the summer, with the most common symptoms from this being a runny nose, coughing, congestion, headaches, pressure in the head or sinus, low energy, and muscle ache, among other things. It's basically a collection of symptoms rather than a defined disease. and it's normally a mild illness that usually resolves itself within a few days, although complications from the initial cold is when things can get serious. And it's also when the initial mild symptoms can evolve into a serious illness, such as developing into a respiratory infection, especially within people who have already compromised or weak immune systems, like the elderly. This is why I wouldn't be as concerned if the deaths piling up so far have been old people, ages 65 years and older. But the fact that a young girl has also kicked the bucket makes me think that this is a huge cause for concern, and the main part about anemia being present is simply a condition that can develop in people suffering from various flus and certain other infections. This means that the anemia itself is not an uncommon thing to develop from having the sniffles and isn't a factor that I'd be super concerned with yet. Because the usual go-to method for treating anemia is to simply treat the underlying disease present, but because we don't know exactly what is going on yet, makes me think that this isn't your average summer cold. And again, a young girl just died, and seemingly overnight. I think it's time, guys, to take this a little bit more seriously and maybe break out the Lysol and start spraying everybody's face as soon as possible. Toshio is shocked to the core, but he doesn't even have time to piece his thoughts together, because just then another call comes in about someone else having died overnight. And this time Toshio heads out even more cautious than he's ever been before. He finds out that this old lady died strangely overnight, right after feeling sleepy and dazed the whole day before, and that she didn't want this crying old lady to take her to the hospital. This is the last straw for Toshio, who now, after seeing over 7 people die within the last half of a month, thinks something seriously strange and worrying is going on around town, causing him to later meet up with his best friend and junior monk, Seishin, along with an official from the town hall, to report on the number of residents who have died within this month. But what's strange is that the town official informs Toshio that even more people have died from this unknown plague than he initially thought, but they didn't report it earlier because the victims died in the neighboring town. They weren't originally included in this town official's death records. Toshio's heart thuds in his chest as he realizes that this may be the start of a terrifying epidemic, with victims initially having very minor symptoms that will soon kill within a few days, which means they have to hurry. But Toshio tries to keep everyone cool and in check, and he tells them to not tell anyone about this epidemic, as they still have no concrete proof, and without proof, they don't have anything. And so Toshio and Seishin set out to get to work, with Toshio the next day getting back a new blood sample from the latest victim in town, this purple-haired girl, with the same problem as all the rest: anemia. Basically all the things that leaves this good doctor even more stumped than before, not realizing that the explanation to all of this dates back centuries. Okay, let's cool it on the scientific Mr. Smart Guy terms for a sec. Now, a reticulocyte is simply a red blood cell that is still developing. Think of them like baby blood cells, not yet fully matured. And an increase in reticulocyte count can rise when there's a lot of blood loss, or in certain diseases in which red blood cells are destroyed prematurely, such as hemolytic anemia. And the rest of the stuff that Toshio mentioned, such as nucleated erythrocyte and hyperplasia of erythroblast, are basically various conditions that can happen within the body, all as a result of a lack of red blood cells. This is what we know so far. However, I would also consider the body's response towards the sudden changes in red blood cell count. That is why I would also look into the possibility of hemorrhagic shock happening within the victims. And to top that off, the symptoms between anemia and hemorrhagic shock are similar. This means that what Toshio thinks could be anemia could be as a result from hemorrhagic shock. So if we go with this hypothesis, if I was Toshio, I would begin looking into any visible injuries, external or internal, to confirm if this is indeed what is going on. Here's the thing. With such a crazy sickness like this, I would inspect each and every nook and cranny on the skin of the victims, because all of this could be from a simple insect bite, which goes to show how important it is that we examine any and all cuts that could be on the body, no matter how small or insignificant they may appear. All of a sudden, a couple then bust through the hospital doors, with this sick chick looking even worse than when the doctor saw her yesterday. And Toshio yells out in anger and frustration. It seems as though every patient waits until they're on their deathbed before even stepping foot in a hospital. It's almost as if they're being instructed to avoid the hospital. And Toshio then notices for the first time these insect bites on this girl's arm, right as the team of doctors admit her into the hospital. But Toshio isn't done with his questions, as he then begins to pry heavily into the boyfriend boyfriend of the sick girl, asking him if he's been in contact with anyone who could have passed on this summer cold to them. And that's when the boyfriend mentions that the only people that they met up with until now was with a new couple who just recently moved into a castle up on the hill. A couple that could only be described as having the coldest look about them, with pitch black eyes and wondrous mint skin, eternally beautiful. But Toshio is all about the sick and disregards the boyfriend's creepy commentary, heading back in to check on the girl. But it's hopeless as she dies later on anyways, adding yet another body to the town's death records, and the doctor himself not one step closer to figuring any of this out. Later that night though, Natsuno stops by his best friend's house, Toru, who later goes to a coffee vending machine and meets the strangest pale-skinned male around their age, this blue-haired guy, who mentions that he also just moved into the house on the hill, and who gets invited by Toru to come chill at his house sometime for a video game night, and blue-haired guy graciously accepts, mentioning that he'll bring another friend to join them in on the fun soon. That same night, Natsuno dreams of the very first victim who he found out about, pink-hair girl, as she appears in the distance, glaring back at our boy with blood-red eyes, closing in with a smirk that could kill until he suddenly wakes up in the dead of night to an empty room. The days pass as this mysterious plague sweeps through the town, raiding even the town's finest of their lives, and the residents mention that the families of those deceased have begun moving away the same night of the victims' deaths. No funeral, no goodbyes, no nothing, leaving the rest of the town more stumped than ever as to what the hell is happening. And it keeps getting worse, because on one fateful day, after receiving the blood sample of yet another recently deceased victim, Toshio takes it upon himself to finally alert the staff on what he thinks is going on, as his ingenious mind finally connects the dots, or so he thinks. With 19 dead so far, they're running out of time, and Toshio thinks that this is truly an epidemic, but not one that's ever been documented before. But before they can ask the town officials or even the government for help, they need to gather the data, starting with their only lead, the condition of normocytic normochromic anemia. That same night, the sleepy town of Sodaba then braces itself for yet another promising night of death, as Natsuno stays over at Toru's house, only to toss and turn late at night with a gloomy feeling of someone watching over him, seeing none other than pink-haired girl yet again, as she glides throughout the house and towards the boy's room, coming for her prey until Natsuno finally wakes up, and he glares around only to see his best friend safe and sound, except he looks awfully pale, and almost as if he just woke up from the dead. But that's just a coincidence, Natsuno thinks. Toshio's best friend, Seishin, finds out from some more neighbors that a lot of people have begun to leave the town only to mysteriously die later, as if they knew their time was up, and they left knowing that they would never return alive. And the news only gets worse for our simple town folk, because at school that day, Natsuno suddenly notices that Toru isn't there, and hears from a girl that he's at home playing a new video game that he got. But Natsuno doesn't trust her, and he heads straight for his best friend's house. Right as he arrives, he sees his beloved bro Toru, just as he left him last, tucked in with a resting face paler than a living corpse, except this time, he's more corpse than living. Nope. Something is definitely going on, and it ain't no simple case of blood disorder. We're seeing freaking ghosts right now, and now our best friend is dead. Now this could have been a simple case of sleep paralysis, which can happen when your brain begins to wake up, but your body is still in sleep mode, resulting in you being awake but paralyzed for a few moments until your body snaps out of it. And with sleep paralysis, it can be very common to hallucinate scary people or creatures near your bed, particularly if you happen to be conscious during the rapid eye movement or REM cycle of sleep. This is what I would have initially blamed seeing pink-hair girl early on. However, now with our friend dying literally the morning after we saw her, this makes me think that this is way too much of a coincidence. If I was Natsuno, I'd take matters into my own dang hands and visit the only place that could provide us with answers, the clinic. And because this isn't no proper giant hospital, this makes me think that the protocols and security measures in diverging sensitive information to people wouldn't be as strict as if we were in a hospital in a big city. So I think we have a very good chance of simply walking in and finding the town's superstar doctor, Toshio himself, because he's likely the only one who will be able to separate the town's speculation from facts. And the fact that we essentially predicted our friend's death can mean a few things, and may or may not have to do with quantum entanglement. Hear me out now. Like Albert Einstein once said, quantum entanglement is basically the science of spooky shit happening at a distance. And this could explain what we saw, like someone who predicted their best friend's death right before it happened. Spooky occurrences like this have actually been linked to quantum biology, which is basically the science of studying shit that doesn't follow the normal laws of physics. In short, the science behind how Natsuno saw his best friend die before before his time could have either been dumb luck or a phenomenon rooted in actual science somehow, or confirmed to us that we actually did see pink-haired girl back from the dead and that she is actually somehow responsible for our best friend's death. A wave of dread suddenly spills over Natsuno as his world suddenly plunges into a darkness that he never thought possible, because this time he believes with his entire being that pink-haired girl is behind this, and he's going to find out how. The next day then comes revolving back as if it were the day before, with another patient dead and more families mourning. Toshio sits deep in thought, refusing to give in to the worst plague of his career, right as he goes through the usual examination routine, noticing another insect bite on the arm of the deceased, and he collects another blood sample. Toshio then later meets up with Seishin to update him on his investigation into the villagers of the town, and Seishin mentions that he's coming across some strange findings, noting that more and more people have begun leaving town, only to die a few days later, thinking it to be connected to the epidemic somehow. But Toshio has heard enough of this, and tells him to shut his four-eyed face up, thinking his efforts to do nothing with the epidemic, and that he's wasted all of his time for nothing, and he retreats back into what is might well be his clinic of corpses. And the corpse fest continues in the form of film flattery, as Natsuno begins spending his nights researching the monsters of Hollywood, hoping to find some insight into just what kind of monster pink-haired girl is, or he believes is. Just as then this kid comments on the zombie film that Natsuno is watching, and mentions that it reminds him of the town legend that he grew up with within this village, the legend of the Okiagari, also known as the dead who rise at night, and they would come back from beyond the grave to punish children who misbehaved, or so the folklore says. And this strikes a chord with Natsuno, because thanks to this guy, he now knows that he's onto something. Okay, while it might seem silly, this could actually be our best bet in gaining some insight into what the hell is going on, because from the looks of things, they really don't have the internet, which means films is our only means of trying to find mirror examples of what we're experiencing in real life. The brain naturally likes to find patterns in things, so let's use it to our advantage in this case, because our town's doctors can't figure out what the hell is going on, so this is the next best thing, because such things like the undead and ghouls initially came from such places like folklore, back before we could explain everything with science to suggest why certain things the way they were. In fact, a very popular theory of how zombies were made comes from a scientist by the name of David Wade, who claimed to have found a neurotoxin in a powder used by magicians in which they would make the victim fall into a deep coma, appearing to be dead, and within a few days after the funeral, the victim would then be awoken by the magician again, giving off the illusion that they were a zombie. So while a lot of what other films say about zombies and the undead may be complete bullshit, there might be a few hints of truth hidden within that we could use to better understand what's going on. Because remember, we saw a pink-haired girl appear in our dreams as some freaky zombie thing, and then our best friend died within the next day. And also at this moment, modern day science can't really explain the shit that is going on right now. However, the fact remains that there are thousands of films and books written on the subject of scary-ass paranormal shit, which means we could potentially find certain instances within folklore to explain what the hell is going on. And remember, no internet, so I would utilize the town's library for any more books based on mythological lore, anything we could use to help explain what we saw. The next day, Natsuno confronts Toshio about pink-haired girl, since Toshio was the one who examined her corpse and wrote up her death certificate. But Toshio assures him that she was definitely dead when he examined her, with rigor mortis already setting in by the time he arrived. He reassures worried Natsuno that there's no way she could be alive unless she took a page right out of Hollywood and came back as a zombie or a vampire. This sends a wave of realization down Natsuno's spine, and he heads off abruptly, leaving Toshio confused as all hell, and makes him suspect that this is in fact not an epidemic after all. Elsewhere, two curious kids stake out the castle on the hill, and this kid sure as shit believes that he saw one of the recently deceased enter the castle, and these poor kids are completely unaware that blue-haired guy is staking them out from the shadows and watching. Then later, as they walk back, Natsuno spots them and mentions that they were just being watched, until he realizes that just like him, they think something is going on in that mansion too, and the two kids hear that Natsuno suspects everything that's gone wrong, including the deaths. Pink-haired girl and even blue-haired guy are all due to the fact that they are Okiagari, undead who have risen from the grave, and that's why Natsuno has been seeing pink-haired girl in his dreams, because she's come back straight from the dead. This solidifies these kids' belief that the dead person they saw enter the castle is also an Okiagari. However, Natsuno says that they need to know for sure, which is why he suggests that they dig up pink-haired girl's grave in order to find out, clearly not caring about any decency for the dead. Later, back at the clinic, Toshio invites Seishin over to discuss his findings that will change the course of history for the worst. Seishin interrupts Toshio to tell him that recently all the death certificates from the town have gone missing, meaning now they don't have the proper paperwork to officially prove how many people they lost in the village, meaning they won't be able to call the government for help. But Toshio couldn't care less and mentions that what's going on isn't an epidemic after all, that all of these deaths are happening because of the Okiagari, or more specifically in layman terms, vampires. This casts a fainting spell over Seishin, who begs Toshio to tell him that he's joking, but tough shit he isn't, because it's one thing to die from hemorrhagic shock, but what disease would cause people to quit their job and physically move away? And Toshio mentions that these creatures are probably using hypnosis on their victims as they feed on them, ordering them to move towns away right before their death, and in this way they've managed to prevent the town's death rate from ever going up, at least officially. Okay, so they were dead wrong about them being zombies, which actually makes a whole lot more sense. However, one thing that doesn't make sense is how some of them are able to withstand sunlight, like blue hair guy, because he clearly was watching the two kids in broad daylight. But let's put a pin in this one for now, because at this point, all signs are pointing to the worst and most insane scenario, that vampires or Okiagari are the cause behind all of this, which means we need to be sure that Seishin actually believes us, because I'll admit, this scary fact can be a tough pill to swallow. And from here on out, we can't have anyone on our side who has any doubts about this. Now that we know what's going on, it's pretty darn likely that we'll eventually come face to face with the Okiagari soon enough, especially once they know that we know about them. If I'm Toshio, I'd start by revealing that these bug bites aren't bug bites at all, but actually bite marks from Okiagari on all of the past victims, and actually find some way to prove it to him that these bite marks were made by Okiagari and not by something from nature. And because of all of this, Toshio now has a plan, starting with the latest soon-to-be victim, who Toshio invites to stay at his clinic overnight, knowing that whatever monster is sucking her dry will be forced to pay them a visit tonight. Elsewhere, the gang visits the burial site, ultimately discovering that the coffin which they thought was filled for so long is in fact empty. Then suddenly a cold pair of hands abduct this little girl and plunge her deep within the enshrouded forest, and are about to bite into her flesh before she reveals a holy token right in front of this monster's face, stopping him just long enough before Natsuno swings a shovel right into his face, knocking him out. They quickly feel his pulse and realize that this beast doesn't have one, making him officially part of the undead, shocking the gang to the core. Natsuno quickly then says to bury his corpse to see if he rises up again tomorrow, and so they begin shoveling, working through the dead of night until this guy's cold, limp body gets buried 6 feet deep. Then, after a sleepless night, they return the next day, and what they discover only confirms what they dare hope wasn't true, that the corpse that they buried last night, just like pink-haired girl, rose up back from the grave, solidifying their suspicions that their small town of Sodaba has been invaded by Okiagari. This little kid suddenly has had enough of this freak show and demands that they charge right up to the mansion on the hill and attack whatever monsters lay dormant within. But Natsuno stops him dead in his tracks, because the cold hard truth is that they don't know what they're up against, whether they're in fact a zombie or a vampire, because that blue-haired kid was spotted checking them out in broad daylight. Meaning that whatever they do, they need to figure out what they're up against first, how many of them are there, and most importantly, how to kill them. Natsuno then suggests that they test out the stake to the heart theory for the next person that inevitably will fall victim to this plague, because they need to figure out how to stop these monsters soon. Okay, this is insane. We finally know what the hell is going on, sorta, except now it's even more terrifying since we don't know anything else. Natsuno is in a pretty tight spot right now. We don't know exactly what these creatures are. They are similar to vampires, but they're not exactly like vampires. How do we kill them? Because all we got so far is to rely on what the movies, TV shows, and books have told us. But does any of that shit actually work on them? Until we find that out, I wouldn't stake my life on coming face to face with any one of them. However, what Natsuno said is a solid place to start. A stake through the heart. And I'd also maybe add severing the human head and setting them on fire as a means of taking them out. Because while sunlight and maybe a cross to their face might not harm them, relying on attacking or ideally obliterating the two most important organs, the brain and the heart, will probably be a good way to kill them without necessarily knowing that it'll work beforehand. The heart sends blood throughout the body and to the brain, and it also provides the body with oxygen and various nutrients. The brain is basically a one-stop shop for everything that the body needs in order to function. It is the command center for the nervous system, and vampire or Okiagari or not, there's little possibility that they'll be able to function without a head attached to their body. I don't care how scary they are. There are some things that can't break the laws of science, people, and living without your head is probably one of them. Until we know more, I'd stick to impaling the heart, severing the head, or setting them on fire during the cover of daylight, at least for now, because there's almost no shot that one of those methods won't work. That same night, Toshio and Seishin set up for what will likely be the most horrifying night of their life so far, and they take watch over the latest plague victim as she lays resting in the hospital room. Because despite everything, Toshio knows that these monsters have taken their time killing their prey so far, since all the victims up until now have taken 4 days to die, meaning that due to the sheer amount of blood within the human body, these horrifying creatures on average probably take days to completely drain their victims dry. Toshio also thinks that these undead creatures inject some sort of toxin into their victims to prevent them from crying out for help during the whole process, much like some insect species that inject a narcotic substance into their prey to let them feed in peace. Whatever the case may be, Toshio is sure that these demons will strike again tonight. Later, Toshio and Seishin await outside the room of their patient, just as they hear the old lady call out her whereabouts, making Toshio suspect that the undead are nearby. And he's right, because he goes up to the only other point of entry and pulls down the blinders, revealing the most horrifying thing: a pair of blood-red eyes attached to a floating corpse. And this Edward Cullen wannabe floats back down to the floor, right before Toshio angrily blasts open the window and declares that he'll knock their teeth in if they set 1 foot inside that hospital. And this, thank God, non-shiny bloodsucker keeps her distance. And Toshio safely secures this frail old lady's soul from damnation for another night. Okay, there's little reason to think that vampires or Okiagaris last night didn't enter because he didn't feel like it. He didn't enter because he couldn't. And this is one advantage that we now know for sure, because right now we're kinda screwed, because it won't be long before that one vampire brings reinforcements, which means we gotta go balls to the wall from here on out. And this means letting the others know finally about what the hell is really going on. Keeping it secret isn't helping anyone. I would use the advantage of daylight to inform all the staff that we're planning a very important meeting late at night. And I would purposely stash melee weapons of all types in and around the floor of where the old lady is being held before night comes around. Then, using the cover of a meeting, I'd be able to have all the nurses and doctors from the clinic gather within the same room as the old lady while we wait for the Okiagari to come back. Because informing our colleagues that this plague is actually the result of Okiagari will be a tough sell, and we're better off showing them. Now, of course, by the time the Okiagari do arrive, they'll be unprepared as hell and won't be expecting such a huge conflict to arise. Which, by the way, is the exact reason why I'd stash as many weapons around the room and floor of our patient, because when these Okiagari inevitably come back and our colleagues finally see firsthand how horrifying these things are, I'm pretty sure then they won't mind grabbing a gun and helping out. And besides, even if they decide to not help me, they'd at least make for some really sweet meat shields for me and Seishin to try and take some potshots at nature's most horrifying creation. The next day arrives as they come to discover their old lady patient is actually recovering, meaning that they've just discovered how to reverse the sickness. Toshio and Seishin then take 5 to bless the Japanese gods for their luck so far before they begin preparing themselves for another night of horror. Seishin is starting to suspect that if the legends and movies are right, then that Okiagari didn't enter last night because it needed permission to enter, and enter they won't. Because then our dual heroes begin preparing for another night of chaos as darkness finally sets again over the hospital, and just then the power goes out, forcing these two to rush back into the old lady's room only to see through the hospital window that this place is now surrounded by Okiagari, and Toshio doesn't even have a chance to prepare himself for battle because blue-haired guy comes up from behind and knocks him out, shocking our two heroes into wondering who and what these creatures really are, including blue-haired guy. The doc then stumbles to his feet and heads to the window, and he's forced to witness his beloved patient get brutally slaughtered by the rest of the Okiagari horde, killing her before evading into the night, instilling more rage into Toshio than ever before, and he prepares to ready himself, Seishin, and anyone else willing to fight these terrifying monsters head-on, setting the stage for the first official Okiagari war in the history of the modern-day world.
And if you want to help us fight the Okiagari, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist down below.